Hi, I'm Jewelle Gomez, and I am really pleased to have participated in the very first Saints and Sinners poetry contest. And I have to say, we had such a wonderful number of uh, people applying and submitting their work, and some really, really lovely work. It made me even more sad that I wasn't right there in New Orleans to get to celebrate in person with everybody from the Saints and Sinners staff and attendees. But we did have some wonderful, wonderful writers, and I am pleased that the winners will be sharing their work with you in a publication. The winner, Danielle Barrow, is quite the performance poet, and I felt like her work was very warm and exciting and really deserving of notice. The runners up, Ezra Adamo and Steven Riel, were equally as adept and well versed in emotional language and writing. So I felt very pleased to have read their work and that we'll be sharing it with everyone. Audre Lorde said poetry is not a luxury. And I really believe that the work that we looked at and that was rewarded is definitely necessary bread, which is the other part of that saying. I'd like to share with you now a piece that I wrote right after Katrina. And I was not in New Orleans at the time, but had relatives who were in Gulfport, Mississippi. And so I have a real strong affection for the area. So this is New Orleans, 2005. I want to be your daughter, crescent smile, dazzling and apprehensive, for there is always danger. With the Mississippi green on my toes, on a dank, safe step, I look down into the many maternal faces for my own. Blood is mingled beneath the surface so long past. There is no separating out whose skin, hair, eyes are whose. When the soil is turned over, mixing bones and names, splintered wood, tiny seeds, and faded photographs, to whom will I belong? A storm of water, emotion, and insensate experts was thrust between us, leaving me by the road in tumult and desperation. The stench is of death and ineptitude. Still, you are gold like gaudy fillings flaring across an open laugh, catching the glint of sun, inviting me back. You are both exciting and comforting, like the end note of a song.
What's good? My name is Danielle Barrow. I'm from Queens, New York, and I'm super excited to be here as the Saints and Sinners Poetry Competition winner. So shout out to Jewelle Gomez for selecting my poems, and I'm going to read some from my manuscript called Capella Mixtape. The first poem is Cutting Cords with Teeth, Another Lesbian Breakup. She is the bookends to my library, each book a story in compassion of truth and innocence, of princesses that save themselves. No white dresses, more like black boots, sweaters, and misplaced cat hair. Mood swings back and forth between our bodies, her rulings out the bad thoughts. She is my last thought, watered to flourish like wildflowers in California fields, pushing up through fire and char. In New York City, cement cracks into bloom, colors rain over the ash and concrete. Skin to skin to skin to eyes. Clouds as cotton candy as lips. She feels home to my bones that have been tossed and fetched and slobbered, buried and torn. She hugs it out, and I am in again, another round. I pull out each individual tooth, tight rusted pliers, pull hard until pop, release molars cracking, mainly to hear the sound of them tinker in the sink one by one, clink, and pull back the skin from my mouth, peeling the flesh, kneading it away from bone like pie dough in the pan. Folds and tears sometimes occur until I am finally naked. I chew on her edges, gumming, chipping remaining teeth into powder, asthma. And this done feels like the last one before that, and the one before that, and that, and that. I get it. I'm difficult. I don't get it. Everything is difficult. A different cult of needy women. Storyline, pronounced jaw strong, 9 to 5. Crumbles at midnight. In the safety of floral hugs. Now smashed glass slippers, limping into patterns of lesbian, of mother, of. I have no words left. She scrubbed them all away and left me sick. Son of a butch. I am woman as a vessel, a design trapped over soul to Bryson Tiller women of interest. I am the tropics, the thunder, the Aries inside your lover, son and daughter, but not quite mother, rough tender the lion and the lamb, a kebab of predator and victim. I am 35 and 14, angsty. A strong believer in education with imagination, rethinking the brick building, paper worksheets, and the school lunch trays. My spirit will always be the New York City skyline. I know every line to the Matrix. We lie in slimy sacks, dozing in and out of protest and complacency. I'm like a sun shower in all its dichotomy, bright and chilling in my duplicity. I am not American cheese, brick by brick, half melting. I am basically 40 years old. A strong believer in Janae Aiko, spinning those sound bowls from LA, swirling in epicenters. My spirit will always be the New York City skyline, then, now, and forever to come. Underwater, inside fire. I know every line to the Fridays, even on a Monday. I'm like glitter in cement, sparkling under fresh jays. I am not afraid of war. I am ready. Maybe. Let's be real, probably not really ready for war, but I put black paint under my eyes, left eye to be exact, because I'm a strong believer in the TLC, Aaliyah, and all the other fallen black women soldiers I hold up in my room late at night, blunts and posters. My spirit will always be covered in rainbow prisms. I know every line to poems written by middle schoolers in Title I Forgotten City backstreets. I write their lines inside my palms and sweat them off before it's time to recite. I am, dragging the bottom of my pants from East River to Lake Toba to Lake Tahoe. I put me over rice, you place me on the rocks. I am, would you rather? Nefertiti. I see her on the Montgomery Street corner and untouch her elbow gently. Wrinkles smooth out backwards, she unclicks the button, unblocks me, unclicks, follows me. My hands unhit her cheeks. Red unstings our faces. She puts my pieces back together to then take them apart again. She unkisses me when we unfight over sushi. Words unraveled from lips backwards into face swallow, unsitting in our shared couch, passing the clip back and forth. Into the jar and in an uncut cigar. Unhearing Frank Ocean, undirtying the dishes on the coffee table. Her lap in Oahu, unframing sand, our heated bodies, repacking our unpacked boxes and picture frames. Unmeeting at that house party in my apartment in Harlem on 125th on Halloween. A lion in Tim's and a Ninja Turtle with a snapback. She follows me into my bedroom, unfollows. Unmeet her. Men catcall her to and from the subway with dark lips, now unpainted nude. Without me, just ungraduating high school. Blood under her fingernails from her last suspension, now unburned and unthrown out by her mom and ex. All her childhood pictures and letters unwritten, in juvie being silent. Just before unstealing that cell phone, shivering for that unwave in 30-degree waters, fogged skies before starting work at Louis Vuitton, before Jehovah's Witnesses door to door in middle school with mom and dad, before cracking open from jumping on the bed and cleaning the carpet with a head of stitches, unlearning how to kiss boys in class, breasts retreat back into her flesh, all black attire, her uncle untouching her in those same places. She unlearned how to count and read and tie her shoes. She's just a kid with chubby cheeks and noticeable curves, undoing her smile, just as a toddler. Finally unseeing color, pushing through her mother, unborn, unruling the kingdom in her organless crypt of clay pots and cat souls, pacing for rebirth. All right, this is my last one. Shout out to Ross Gay, this is for you. The thing is, it was all a dream. I want to tell you a story, but shouldn't, because I used to love her, it was once said. The thing is that I am hot pink in my dreams. Light apricot when awake. A trick to see how you pronounce it. I want to tell you a story I shouldn't. It's not clear when the dream ends and the day starts, so I keep her in the middle all night. I used to love her, but her shadow feels safer. Finding my eyes, it was once said that women are too full to complete other women. So I break off my ribs for her to pull apart and make a wish. The thing is, she only bit the apple, not to eat it, but to see if the act would switch out a man for curves and emotions. It was all a dream. Before any magazines, she flipped rocks and devil's advances instead of those glossy pages. She wanted to tell me a story she shouldn't. So she used the snake to carve out my insides. I used to love her until my cavity became rhythmless. I was beating before. It was once said colors are imagined anyway. The thing is that I am mostly gray with some purple and blue bruised jumping jacks around the eyes. And it was all a dream that rainbows represent anything other than chasing opaque luck. Of course I want to tell you a story. I shouldn't. About the girls and the bowl and the fruit and the boring painting of the waxy fruit instead of her wedding lips. I used to love her until her spit turned sour and then bitter from rot. As it was once said, I fermented her lips to black her out. Thank you so much, Saints and Sinners, especially for highlighting queer folks. I appreciate that, and I appreciate all of you. And I'm hoping that someday soon we'll be able to see each other in person. Thank you again. My name is Danielle Barrow.
Hi, I'm Steven Riel in Massachusetts. I'll be reading the 3 poems in my poetry submission, which was a runner-up for the Saints and Sinners poetry competition. The first poem I'm going to read is called I Never Went Back to You, and it's in 3 parts. I never went back to you. 1. Thoroughbred freckles dappled your deltoids as if you were model and classic statue in one. In the slanted amber sunbeams, those autumn afternoons. I marveled at your grown-up realm where you lined the path to your bed with stacked newspapers. Your bathroom's blaring fluorescence I even embraced because it spotlit my waking dream as I'd lather your nape, gape behind your milky back. Before those weekends, my undergraduate abdomen had glistened each solitary Saturday night in my rundown apartment in the city where I kicked back damp sheets, my scrubbed ears, a small town audience held captive while the upstairs neighbor, a booted clone, and his first trick of the weekend pounded hard and bellowed just above my ceiling, making my whole being blush. As a boy, I'd spent Lent studying Jesus's doweled feet, the teardrop gash in his side. The body of Christ stuck to my tongue and stayed stuck, as if I needed a tutor before I could savor melting Godiva despite the martyrs. Your fingertip beguiled me. I thought I was ugly and undeserving. I was 19 on that velvety sofa as the theme of your slideshow drifted towards skin. Mine pulsed for the sequel. All I ever wanted, creamy man, older man, bigger man, muscled man. But what came after easing off your wire glasses 4 weekends in a row wasn't all I wanted after all. 2. I never went back to you till tonight. An idle Google search turns up a dagger after your name. My mind staggers. Then I track down your death date, print the black and white yearbook photos of you at 21, pale and gangly, in the back row with the young Republicans, your tweed jacket and the horn-rimmed glasses sported by the other prep boys you bedded. You bragged you bagged scores of them. That lit up look on your face, I recall, the kissable upflip in your upper lip. Now I'm on a mission, hunt down articles you authored, a color shot of the modest memorial your rich but restrained parents donated to your alma mater. Their online obituaries lengthy because they were prominent yacht and golf club pilgrim descended industrialists. And so were you, their tersely mentioned, previously deceased eldest scion, the third, who spilled his seed on me. It wasn't love story. You kept miles away from love means never having to say, from introducing me to the mansion, where even if I'd possessed a mainline pedigree, top drawer manners, twill from J Press, and never ever alluded to sunny afternoons. By contrast, Jenny Cavallari's fiery red dress would have seemed a flare fit to be married. 3. Mayflower Cemetery. Because your brother didn't answer my letter. Because I figured that like my brother, an unmarried and childless son, you'd be buried beside your parents. Because at first I didn't see your cutting board-sized stone. Because it was that day each October when a whole generation of leaves lets go. Because I now know you stopped breathing during the first wave of our plague. Because I would have held you lightly as you threw up or coughed, would have stood like a wet boulder at your funeral, whether your kin liked it or not. Because to rip back dandelions and crabgrass and scrape with my nails broken pine needles, filling in the letters of your name, I will kneel 6 feet from you year after year. My poor younger brother David died of AIDS when he was 28 years old. This poem is called Today, Brother, You Would Have Turned 56. We did become cheerleaders in the end. After high school games against Northfield, secretly we'd stomp, clap, and pretend we wore their squad Sado Gentile red leather gloves. How hickster uncool. We'd mimic them. Slap, slap, idolizing instead our fluffy sweater school's troop, who flounced when the right rim ball dropped with a tap. College. In this snapshot, you lifted a boulevard-wide banner side, shirt tied high to flaunt copper-toned skin. Your thin gray shorts suggested the rest, how pretty undergraduates paraded in pride. Head cheerleader political queer, I led the hey, hey, ho, ho retort. No other person on earth mocked those red leather gloves. My thumbs drum our chant beside this photo I love. This is called A Cage's Lament. Yes, Mr. Pigglesworth, you wipe your beak against my kiln-baked skin, but I want to hold you, really hold you. You know me as the obstacle, without understanding that inside I become lava whenever your feathers brush my bars. If only I could cheer up and inform you, your incessant sawing and clawing get you nowhere, that I'm welded wrought iron with recessed rivets and no exposed nuts. It's not in my power to fall apart. I can only hold up your coop cup, cuttlebone, jungle gym, and full-length mirror so that together we can admire the long tail of your red tuxedo. Oh, but that strumpet, Mrs. Smith, uses me to woo and ensnare you, while she coyly calls you Mr. Neurotic. I'm the slave hoisting her gifts day and night, the tropical fruits, the soft wood toys you gnaw. If I could produce snapshots of the former misters she's hand-reared, you'd cease to crave her stroking. Even if I found a way to froth up into gossamer netting and become an aviary, I couldn't compete with her bottomless wallet. While you slumbered snug inside my fitted night cover, she told her plaid nephew she's provided for you, her final companion in her will. As for me, if I'm lucky, I'm destined for a yard sale. At least I'm always on hand to hear you mimic the clock. If only I could evaporate. At least, my pet, you take it all out on me instead of plucking yourself. If only I could rust away. At least I winced for you during your youthful, panicked attempts to bite through me. If only I could unlatch. At least I witnessed those attacks, though they've become habit, become half-hearted. If only I could speak. Thanks, saints and sinners and Jewelle Gomez, for choosing my poems. Hope to see you all at the festival next year. Bye.
Hi, my name is Ezra Adamo. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, and I'm going to be reading from my poetry submission Underhill, which was chosen as a runner-up in the Saints and Sinners Poetry Contest. In his pocket, a figurine of his husband. After rain, with a small rabbit box, he walked to the corner to gather snails, huddled strolling on the Aspidistra elatior, the cast iron plant. Musk of close earth, lazy whispers. He is raw and sober, and they are soft. Imagined one behind the ear, trailed wet to the eyelid. He blinks to stand up, close the box, and take his mother's hand home. Weather vane. We only know what my blood tastes like. My body never heals or dissolves unwanted parts. Gold, I wear a tree around my finger, and he wants to bury me, he says. Starry cheeks, frozen blue. We drink coffee unqualified when we feel a lull. Tepid wind, sweet rain, and mold the dips and hills of the backs of our hands, fingers together, barely. I leave blood on his soft, foggy skin. I've never been pretty. Fingers curled, dug under ribs and laughing young. I hold rounded potential for love, potential. His veins drape and throb sick. I wait for new body price so I can dip tangled wet beneath lavender and stripped roof. Dedicated city whispers, Saturday and Sunday aren't times, and I want to die in France. Bated blush for him or anyone, or brick and rail spike, dry sweet like I imagine his cologne. Thank you to Saints and Sinners for choosing my poems, and to everyone involved for making the festival possible.
Thanks so much to our poetry judge, Jewelle Gomez, and to our winner and runners-up for sharing their poetry with us. I'm Brad Richard, Secretary of the Board of Directors for the festival, and myself, a poet with 4 collections of poetry. I'm also proud to be the 2015 Louisiana Artist of the Year. I'm also co-editor of our first ever poetry anthology, which will include the winner, runners-up, and all of the finalists from this year's contest. The anthology will be available soon, so follow us so you can get a copy. We were excited to have over 100 entries this year of extraordinary range. Poets from Boston to Queens to New Orleans, and an aesthetic range reflecting the diverse wealth of contemporary poetry. Our contest reopens on May 1st, and we look forward to reading your work then.
Hi, I'm Salem West. I'm the publisher of Bywater Books and this year's judge for the Saints and Sinners Short Fiction Contest. From Ernest Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants through Flannery O'Connor's A Good Man is Hard to Find to Brian Washington's Heirlooms, short fiction has always been the barometer of the world around us. And this year was really no different. Masks, social distancing, trans violence, Black Lives Matter, QAnon, and always Dolly Parton. We received several hundred entries this year at the contest from LGBT writers across the globe, and I'm proud to introduce to you our winner and two runners-up. The winning entry is The Fog House by Colby Byrne. Colby is originally from New Jersey, and he went to Vassar College where he studied writing and collaborated on original plays. He's even spent a semester abroad in Russia studying theater. He now lives in New York City where he works as a teaching assistant at a school for children with developmental disabilities. And in his spare time, he studies Japanese with the long-term goal of working as a teaching assistant in Japan. The two runners-up in no particular order are Lisa Hines for her story Ready, and Laura Price Steele for her short story Marrow is the Bone. Lisa is originally from Colorado and holds bachelor's degrees in accounting and interior design. She's currently living in Philadelphia, where she works designing interior spaces and collaborating and working on her creative efforts. Laura got her MFA from the University of North Carolina in Wilmington. She's the past winner of the Plowshares Emerging Writer Award in Nonfiction and the Montana Book Prize for fiction. She's published in many literary journals, and she's working on a novel. So, as I hand you off to these very talented writers to share their works, I can only hope that you enjoy it as much as I have. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Colby Byrne. I'm from Ridgewood, New Jersey. And today I'm going to be reading my short story, The Fog House, which was chosen for this year's winner of the Saints and Sinners fiction competition. I'm going to be starting from the beginning of my story. I had a new message from a girl calling herself Heath, short for Heathcliff, it turned out. She read a poem I posted on my blog when I was feeling self-indulgent and looking for the artistic validation my professors wouldn't give me. It was about myself, but also about Wuthering Heights, which I had just read in my Victorian literature course and was subsequently obsessed with. Not that I especially enjoyed the experience of reading the novel itself, it's just that I knew getting caught up in its gothic cult following would make me feel interesting. All over my little blog were images from different Wuthering Heights movies, countless quotes like Kathy's iconic, "He's more myself than I am," and clips from Kate Bush's music videos. And you can bet I was blasting that song on repeat. I loved showing off on my blog like that, looking more academic than I really was. Like I was the kind of person who could actually be touched by a work of literature, one from the 19th century, no less. Not many in my real life viewed me as an intellectual or even as artistic, just quiet. Here on my blog, with a decent audience, I was cultured, esoteric even. I like to think they pictured me like Kate Bush in that music video, with flowing see-through fabrics gracefully throwing myself onto a grassy hill. "He's so effervescent," they'd say. Heath's message read, "Beautiful poem. We are happy to find another looking for Emily's truth, */*. Do you know about Fog, 1999? I loved her immediately. It felt like a major accomplishment that a person with such an ethereal messaging style and casual familiarity with Bronte's sister appreciated my work. I went to her blog. It had a black background and was programmed so the viewer's mouse looked like a single blinking eye when swept across the screen. I scrolled through her posts, a series of phone pictures taken of a grainy video game on a fancy TV, burning candles always lit on either side. Beneath each photo, there was no description, just a date. A photo had been posted every day for as far back as I bothered to scroll. And I scrolled for a while. The game on the screen always depicted the back of a male figure dressed in a black overcoat walking through a dense fog. Most of the shots were nearly indiscernible from one another, while some gave a better sense of the scenery this little man was traveling, filled with deep green hills and occasional stone paths. I opened a new tab and Googled Fog Game 1999 and found a brief Wikipedia article about a Japanese video game very loosely based on Wuthering Heights, where you play as an exorcist in the moors, assisting various strangers haunted by ghosts. The game was never released outside of Japan. I messaged Heath back, trying to sound as cool as she did without looking like a poser. Interesting. How did you find it? Your blog feels like a dream. Squiggly line. I felt self-conscious about the squiggly line, but decided not to think about it too much. Later that night, I got a response. Julia did. There's a secret if your soul is open. We'd like to show you someday. Heath and I had a back and forth for about a month. It turned out she was living with her girlfriend Julia in a farmhouse in upstate New York. Julia's family was wealthy, and this past year they allowed her and Heath to move in there together. The two of them had recruited a few people over the course of the year to live as a unit in what they dubbed the Fog House. Why did they come there? To find Kathy. Julia was collecting like-minded people who were willing to follow her on a search for Kathy. In that sense, she was like Heathcliff pining after his beloved Kathy's ghost in the novel. But this was also different. Kathy isn't ghost. Kathy is really God. I'm sure most would have blocked her right then and there, but I decided to hear her out. I was a friendless college freshman at a big university then. My roommate was always out partying, and I spent most of my weekend nights reading blogs, drinking boxed wine until I threw up, taking Tums, and feeling sorry for myself. I've been on a range of antidepressants since middle school, when a severe case of social anxiety took over. I wouldn't talk to people unless directly approached, and even then I would resent a person for forcing me to engage. I could always find a reason why anything I was saying was wrong or disturbing, so I was constantly deleting sentences in my head midway through speaking them. Conversations would always end with a string of jumbled words floating in the air and my unsettled audiences excusing themselves politely. Over time, my anxiety became less severe, but that didn't mean my social life suddenly blossomed. Any hopes of making new and interesting friends in college were dashed, and by the time the spring semester, my freshman year, began, I had come to terms with the fact that I was by nature a person meant to be alone. Fine. I believed in me, and my entire value system was based around that self-preservation. I liked to think of myself as someone who thought nothing mattered, but this was difficult to reconcile with the fact that I also mattered a whole fucking lot. In high school, I'd gone through brief stints of satanic worship to counter my parents' vehement Christianity, but I never had the discipline to stick with it. I disliked the idea of being led by the dark. I guess that's what drew me to Wuthering Heights. So did I think Julia and Heath were crazy for believing that God was hidden somewhere deep inside a bad video game? Who's to say? If God really was so elusive, why wouldn't Fog 1999 be the exact place to find him? Or her, rather. Loving Jesus stopped being edgy millenniums ago, so maybe these two figured out a nice alternative. I can't say that complimenting my poetry didn't sway me to give them the benefit of the doubt. The fog is endless. You run forever. When you stop running, God gives up on you. What happens when you find her? You can see. I told Heath my spring break was coming up, and she said Julia wanted to meet me. I bit the bullet and drove 6 hours to the Fog House, thinking about the Amish a lot as I went through Pennsylvania. It was less of a farmhouse and more of a mansion with a barn. There were acres of open land, woods, and a long gravel driveway. I pulled up next to the house and got out of my car. Heath watched me from the porch, then walked over to stand about a yard from me, her hands crossed in front of her and her bare feet digging into one another. She had enormous curly hair in the middle part and dark circles under her eyes. She wore a billowing cotton black dress with a plaid red blanket draped across her shoulders. "You're tall," she shouted, as if she were very far away. She had an indiscernible accent and a look in her eyes that also felt distant. "Julia will be happy." She never smiled. I followed her in the side door of the house and was immediately struck by a burning herbal smell and sounds of a piano playing in the distance. There was a large circular table with several chairs surrounding it and a candelabra at its center. Heath took my bags from me and led me down a long, dim hallway. The walls were lined with watercolors on ripped sheets of paper, each portraying two eyes emerging from a gray mask that varied in size and intensity from painting to painting. We came to an open room with a high ceiling and wooden beams, and there was Julia, painting on an easel. She had straight dark hair tied in a ponytail and wore a white linen dress that looked expensive. In one hand was a crystal glass filled with bright pink liquid. When she noticed us, she stood up with a cheerful smile, put her glass down, and floated over on her bare feet. She embraced me and whispered in my ear, never turn your brights on in the fog. She pulled away to stare into my eyes, and I became paranoid that she saw something there. But then she laughed as if this whole thing were a joke, and downed the rest of her pink drink. It's so nice to finally meet you. That was just an excerpt from my story. You can find the rest of it in the Saints and Sinners anthology. Thank you so much to the Saints and Sinners competition for choosing my story, and I look forward to seeing you all at SAS Fest, hopefully next year. All the best. Bye.
Hi there, I'm Laura Price Steele. My story, Marrow is the Bone, was a runner-up in the Saints and Sinners fiction contest. I'm going to read a small portion of that here. I'll just be starting right from the beginning. Ben's faster on the downhill than I am. He stands up on his pedals, puts his arms out straight, and coasts without touching the brake. I can't do that. I'm always feathering the levers, even when it makes my tires shudder and skid. The first time we ever rode together, he noticed me pulling up, and he yelled at me over his shoulder. The words were muffled by the distance, by the wind, but I could tell from the way the syllables looped that he was telling me to keep up. I tried my best to stop riding the brake, but the momentum terrified me. It felt like my skeleton was going to slide right out of my skin. Even at my fastest, I couldn't keep up with him. I was maybe 200 yards back when he fell. I heard it, the tumble of the bike, the spokes rattling, and the thump of a spilled body. The noise made my chest contract. Instinctively, I closed my hands around the brakes. The bike tipped forward like a threat, and so I opened my fist, let the wheels roll. Time elongated. I could feel the seconds stretch out like hot taffy. When I came upon him, Ben was sitting up. The bike had careened off the trail and landed in the thick bushes down near the creek bed. I came to a skidding stop. Ben peered up at me. His helmet was cocked to one side, and there was a smear of blood on his cheek. Of course, we'd looked each other in the eye before, but this time was different. His embarrassment and my fear stripped the pretense off everything. Pretense I hadn't even realized was there. You okay, man? I asked. He smiled, looked at his gloved hands. I think so, he said. What happened? I asked. I expected him to take me through the play-by-play. That's the kind of guy he is. Everything is a story to him. Ben swung his gaze back up to meet mine, and I felt a crumpling in my chest. I fell, he said. His brow creased. He had one of those brows that was always creasing. I swung my leg over my bike and set the back wheel against a tree. You're bleeding, I said, looking at his cheek, but Ben glanced down at his shin. I took a step toward him and saw the thick red line on his leg. Without my bike in front of me, I didn't know where to put my hands. Ben picked up a smooth rock, pushed it against his ankle, and slid it up his leg so that the blood glommed onto it. Then he tossed the rock into the bushes. That made it worse. Now the blood and dirt was matted into his leg hair. Do you want to try to stand up? I asked. I held my hand out to him. Ben smiled. He had the disheveled but satisfied look of a kid who'd somersaulted down a hill for no reason. He glanced at my hand and reached for it. Ben and I had been working together for almost a year by then. We hung out sometimes outside of work. We'd grab a beer or go for a hike. We even planned to go skiing once, though we had to cancel when a windstorm kept the chairlifts from opening. But in all that time, all those hours unloading and scanning shipments at the warehouse, we'd never touched. That's what I realized when he reached out and grabbed my hand. It was the first time our bodies had ever come in contact. I pulled Ben to his feet. We let our hands unclasp, but still he was only a couple inches from me. I could feel the heat coming off of him. It was the first time I understood him as someone with a body. Fuck, he said, looking down toward his bike. I can get it, I offered. He shook his head and started down the slope. He had to wrestle with the bushes, which were so thick his top half looked like it was floating. I could hear the sticks breaking against his legs. He swore, hissing through his teeth. I sidestepped down a few paces and held my hand out, and he rolled the bike into it. Ben made a show of riding the rest of the way back to the trailhead, though the bike was making a rubbing noise, like the tires were no longer set right. It was easy to keep up with him now, but I couldn't tell if he was riding more cautiously or if his bike just wouldn't fly like it used to. He dropped me off in the parking lot of my apartment. I pulled my bike off the top of his car, and he got the front wheel out of the trunk for me to reattach. I bent over for a second to set the floor on right, and when I stood up, Ben clapped me on the back. It was not something he'd ever done before. "Thanks, man," he said, leaving his hand on my shoulder. I thought for a second that he might lean in and hug me, but then his hand slid away. "You better clean yourself up," I said. He had a smear of blood on his cheek, but I couldn't tell where it had come from. "The wife will love that," he said, looking down at his leg. A beat of silence slipped by. I smiled. "See you Monday," I said, and I pulled my bike up on the curb. Thank you, Saints and Sinners. Hope to see you at the festival next year.
Hi, I'm Lisa Hines, coming to you from my home in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I will be reading an excerpt of my short story, Ready, which was a runner-up in the Saints and Sinners fiction competition. Pedro stared at himself in the bathroom mirror in the hotel suite, floors above the ballroom where he was about to get married. He thought of the bodies rushing around below him, florists and caterers, hurrying to get it all just right. He thought about the people and all the flowers stacked between him and his wedding. He wondered what they were doing at this exact moment. Were they laughing, crying, making love? Then he flattened the lapels of his suit, applied some cologne, and thought about his father. As he made his way down the corridor, he was struck by a sense of déjà vu. Not the exact moment, but the feeling. The stomach like the hive of bees, the cold damp of his hands, the fear that comes from something so personal being so public. He was admittedly a little bit distracted when he reached his mother's door. Otherwise, he would have waited for a response when he knocked, a gentle tap, rather than just pushing the not quite latched door open and walking right in. Had he not been so lost in thought, he might have called out or heard something that gave him pause. But instead he happened unannounced upon his mother and his bride-to-be. There they were, the two women he loved most in the world, wrapped in lace and tulle and smelling like all the flowers in a garden. They quickly broke apart, eyes wide and bodies stiff with surprise. Dust motes danced in the empty space between them. The only things moving in a room were just a moment ago, silhouetted by soft light filtering through the curtains. They had been delicately leaning into each other, kissing. Pedro's father loved music, clothes, and making his mother laugh. Whenever Pedro thought about him, Sam Cooke's You Send Me, Chanel Blue, and his mother's smile all came to him at once. Even as a memory, the man was a sensory experience. Pedro always knew his mother and father's relationship was different. While his friend's parents seemed to have all this space between them as they passed in the same room or between the words spoken at the dinner table, his had proximity. Even as a little boy, he recognized being outside of it. His parents loved him, but he was one step removed from their closeness. If asked to describe his childhood before, it would have been a loop of perching on the kitchen counter, his mother making tamales, and his father dancing around her, twirling her, dipping her, a smile and a laugh that spread all the way to her eyes. The only time his parents seemed tense was when they were inviting outsiders in. Pedro didn't understand why they put themselves through it, and even asked once, but his father just gave him a wink and said, "How will all the ladies know how handsome you are if we don't have them over?" And Pedro laughed like it was a game because he wanted his father to believe it. As his parents got ready, they grew quiet. His mother would put on clothing she never wore, long skirts and sleeves, high collar, and wipe the red from her mouth and the shadow from her eyes. Pedro sat on the bathroom counter, watching her doll herself, not understanding. While his father got dressed in one of his many beautiful suits, Pedro's mother dressed him. He knew she hated getting ready for these things, but he loved it because he got to dress just like his father. He still remembered going with his father to the tailor, standing still and getting poked with pins, feeling the weight of the fabric on his shoulders as the tailor and his father discussed the break of the pants and the hit of the cuff, the air smelling faintly of chalk, the whole thing a ceremony. Once he was dressed and hair parted and glossy with pomade, his mother would usher him back into their bedroom. His father would turn, smiling and nodding. "Okay, amigo, I see. And then he'd do the high five that ended with a snap, and then he'd turn to Pedro's mother and say, "Wait, something is missing, no?" And she would stand back and look at him like she was solving a puzzle, and then snap her fingers. She would go to her father's vanity and hold out the midnight blue bottle. "A gentleman must smell nice too, no?" and then she would spray it into the air, and Pedro would walk into the cloud, feeling the soft kiss of vapor on his skin. On this particular night, right as this moment passed, the first guest arrived. The doorbell was like a foreman entering the room. In an instant, Pedro's father transformed from lithe and fluid to rigid and solid. His mother went from relaxed and confident to erect and uncertain. Pedro looked from his mother's face to his father's, their eyes saying, "We are brave." And the early moments of that dinner party felt like all the others. Husbands and wives arrived together, men all in suits, women dressed just like his mother. The men peeled off to join his father around the bar cart. The women headed to the kitchen. Pedro stood suspended in the middle, caught between his obligation to be a man and his desire to be where all the warmth was. And then he appeared, a nightmare in Pedro's living room. Mr. Brennan was a serious man with a square jaw and severe haircut. Pedro had only seen him once before when he came to speak to their class. He talked a lot about the country and how it had been dangerous and full of sin. He said a lot of those words that stung like lemon juice, things that Pedro didn't understand but that made him feel sad and alone. When he got home from school that day, he cried until his mother's blouse was wet with tears. When his body had finished heaving, his mother took his face in her hands and said, "Mi cielo, my sky. Everything feels sad and alone. Everyone feels sad and alone. Some people feel it inside like you and me. Some run from it. Running from it can look all kinds of ways. Sometimes it looks like eating too much. Sometimes it looks like spending too much. Sometimes it looks like hurting yourself. People like Mr. Brennan are the saddest kind. They're the ones who are so lonely and afraid they have to take things from other people to feel brave. We should always find love in our hearts for people like Mr. Brennan because they need it the most, and we have bravery to spare." The men filtered into the dining room and positioned themselves at alternating seats. Pedro's father at the head, he was the first to take a seat, and then the other men followed in unison. Only then did the women emerge from the kitchen and take their seats to the left of their respective husbands. The table was filled with platters of roasted meat, buttery potatoes, and fresh baked bread, all favorites of their guests. Although this food was much more decadent than their usual fare, Pedro found himself daydreaming about the smoky flavors and savory sweet richness they usually ate. He knew that this, the way that they were eating now, was better than the way they ate every day. He knew it had something to do with the people here being better than they were, but it was all very confusing. How do you reconcile something worse being better just because someone tells you so? It seemed like someone else was always deciding what was good and what was bad. While Pedro had been daydreaming, his father had led the table in prayer. The room filled with the sounds of silver scraping porcelain and "please pass the potatoes" and the soft thud of platters returning to the tabletop. Pedro looked up to find Mr. Brennan sitting quiet as the sound reverberated around him. Quiet like the forest before the report of a rifle. Quiet like the stillness between heartbeats. Pedro kept returning to his mother's words, and as the evening wound to a close, he went to search out Mr. Brennan. He wasn't sure why or what he would do when he found him, but he thought maybe he could share some kindness, some courage. Mr. Brennan wasn't in the living room with the few remaining guests. He wasn't in the kitchen or the bathroom. Pedro figured he must be collecting his and his wife's coats. As Pedro got closer to the coat room, he caught a whiff of his father's cologne, but maybe he was just smelling himself. Just outside the door, he heard a whisper, his father's, then another voice, a man's, soft and tender like the purr of a cat. Pedro didn't know this was a moment that meant more than any other, so he walked right into the coat room. First, he saw his father's back, his navy suit and oil black hair. Then he was staring straight into the eyes that belonged to the second voice, a voice Pedro had only known to say cruel things, a voice that lived inside a man who was too lonely to be brave, a lonely man wrapped tenderly around his father. So that was a little bit of my story ready. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much to Saints and Sinners for acknowledging it and including it amongst the other amazing entries this year. And I hope to see you all next year.